Hi, I'm Robin Ince and welcome to the Sarah O'Connell Show.
Welcome to the Sarah O'Connell Show.
Welcome to the Sarah O'Connell Show. It's an absolute delight to have you here today. Now, you are currently here with your new tour, Pragmatic Insanity. Can you tell me a bit about it? What are the themes? What are you discussing?
Yeah, it's basically, as usual, as I'm sure many other comedians have told you, you come up with a title and then you have to do that about a year before you actually do the show, and then you go, oh, it has nothing to do with well, I think it does have something to do with Pragmatic Insanity. What it's about really, this one is, a lot of it's about art. The science shows that I've done in the past are all really meant to, I suppose, say to people, you don't have to be tremendously smart, tremendously well versed in an idea to approach it. And so I decided, well, I'll do art, because a lot of people I think, well, I don't really know about art. But you don't have to know anything. You just have to be fearless enough to go, I'm just going to go and see stuff and see how I react to it. And then within that is also, I think, a lot of it is about kind of ideas of acceptance, ideas of not being scared sometimes of saying ideas in your head. And in fact, in this show as well, to some extent, I deal with ideas of suicide as well, because I did, when I was last on tour, I took a bit of a break from touring. I was out in Australia and I met this woman who, one night, she said to me, you comedians need to do more material about suicide. Yeah. And the reason was because her daughter had killed herself. And when I came back, having taken 2 years off from writing any of my own shows, I thought she mentioned that and I should try and deal with this and try and talk about it. So that's another thing. I talk a little bit about suicide, a little bit about death, and ultimately love, art and kindness. So hopefully it is a very positive show. I think there's a lot of negativity and there's a lot of kind of a celebration of hate and anger across social media and within our mass media. And so I wanted to do a show that was a rebuttal to some of those ideas.
Fantastic. That's the great thing about comedy. You can address like really difficult subjects.
I think that's what I love about it, is there's, the older I've got, the more I've thought, if you've got that chance to stand on stage for 90 minutes, 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever it might be, then you should talk about things. You should talk. It shouldn't just be. It can just be jokes. If people just want to do jokes, just do jokes. But I think it seems a bit of a waste. There's a wonderful exhibition at the Tate Modern at the moment, which is all about the rise of black artists in the 1940s, 50s, 60s. And at one point, there's a quote where someone says, art for art's sake is pointless. It's got to be about something. And I know that's true of poets that I know as well, and many people across the board go, if you're going to create something, then it shouldn't just be, oh, that's pretty. Behind the prettiness is good if there's something else.
Exactly.
And you pause for the cup of tea. No, it's perfect.
It's really good. Well
timed. Salient conclusion. Don't worry. Well, let's get back to this interview. Sorry.
Absolutely. So, with your new show, can you tell me a bit about your creative process? How do you sort of come up with material?
Well, it's basically, I'm always reading and I'm always going off to places and I'm always looking at things. I'm always trying to have small adventures, major adventures, just like in the science shows, quite often I ended up just meeting people who say, would you like to have a brain scan? And I'd go, yeah, brilliant. And so, in fact, at the Royal Institution Christmas lectures, my friend Sophie Scott, who is doing them this year, she sent me things saying, can we do an experiment which is a kind of intracranial, I think, magnetic pulse, which will be going to there'll be a pulse of magnetism because of my brain, which should disable my ability to speak for a while. And yes, I just thought, and she went, here are the dangers. I went, don't even listen to them. I will be fine. This will be an adventure. And then I've got to go straight off and do a show. So hopefully it'll come back quickly enough. But so all the time I'm trying to, and in this, I just always go to art galleries when I'm on tour. And then I just make little notes. And so it starts off, the first version of it will be very rough. I'll go out in front of an audience and I start talking. Okay. And then it builds. And normally I've got some routines that already I know are formed enough that, if things go really badly, I can suddenly go, oh, I've got that bit of shtick that I can do there. But it starts off very loosely. And then normally, hopefully quite quickly, I'll have bits. But I try and change it every single night. Like with this show, because it's about art, I'm showing people some paintings and some things that have particularly kind of inspired or excited me. So it means that I end up having structure by chance, because like last night in Bristol, it was the longest version of the show that I've done, and I was going off all over the shop, but then every now and again I go, oh right, brilliant, let me now tell you about this story involving Lucy and Freud or whatever.
So you sort of, the destination, but it's not necessarily, the idea is not necessarily fully formed, so you sort of talk through it and sort of explore it live on stage.
Yeah, that's what I like, the idea of it being quite that people know that every night will be different to some extent. They're never seeing a scripted show. They're seeing, and to me the most important thing is that every night I have to give just a huge amount of energy. I have to, I never want it to be a lazy show. I never want to just be kind of sit back and think, this is the show, here are the jokes. I want to have a sense of engagement with people.
Yeah, so because there's some people that I've seen live, and then I'd love the show, and I've ended up getting the DVD, and it's almost word for word the same. So I guess it keeps it fresh for you as well.
Yeah, I think I get bored very quickly. That's one of the problems. And I think it's interesting. Like some of the bits that I've actually entirely thrown out the show are bits that I thought, oh yeah, that idea was only interesting to me for a week, and I can already tell that that's getting less. And I don't think it's because the joke's getting worse or anything. It's just because the audience, without even realising it, are sensing, hey, he's not having as much fun with this as when he was talking about, the weird children dressed up for trick or treat.
That's it, 'cause it's kind of like, it's not the same as a song, but it's something that you're repeating a lot, so it has to be something that you enjoy telling people, and the enthusiasm has to be there as well.
Very much so, and I'm a huge fan of just passion. When you see someone who, I don't mind watching someone fail if I think that the idea behind it, they were so driven, they so wanted to express that idea, and today they haven't found the right way. It's like Kate Tempest, who is such a brilliant poet and writer and musician. I remember doing a gig with her a few years ago, and she said, is it okay if I just do a thing tonight? I'm going to improvise an idea and it might not work. And I went, it's fine. And then it didn't quite click, but it didn't matter. And she was like, oh no, I didn't. I said it didn't matter because the audience loved to watch it. They were so excited by the fact they were watching something being created in the moment, and it just happened. And then she did a similar thing the next night, and it was amazing and just incredibly powerful. But even when it wasn't the version that she'd hoped, it was still a beautiful thing.
That's it, because magic can happen from spontaneity as well, right?
Very much so. I think that's it's a lovely moment where you just think, I wasn't expecting that. I remember once years ago doing a gig in Manchester, and I said this joke and it made me laugh, and I said to the audience, I said, I'm so sorry, that looks tremendously arrogant to laugh at the joke, but I didn't know I was going to say that. So my experience of the joke was actually the same as theirs.
Yeah, you're hearing it for the first time. I don't know 99% of the stuff that comes out of my mouth before I've heard it. It's a constant pleasant surprise to me.
It's a great thing, isn't it, where you actually go, where does it come from? Where is we don't consciously sit down and go, right, now I'm going to say these things and this is the conversation I'm going to have. It is just all of these little things popping out, these neurons working overtime.
Yeah, and it's, you're just feeding off the person you're talking with, and you just get inspired, on the fly, and it just sort of falls out. And sometimes you have a happy accident, and that sounds horrible, but it
is though. A lot of the time, isn't it? You go, we don't know where this conversation's going. We've never met before. You don't know necessarily what you're going to say next. I don't know what I'm going to say next.
Very true. I literally don't. But that said, are there ever do you still sort of get nervous before you're about to go on stage? I know you've played at Wembley and like huge audiences.
So mad that doing arena tour with Brian Cox is just like that, and we were so relaxed about it. That's what I found interesting, is playing to 11,000 people. We were just before the start of the show, we had this incredible screen, really amazing illumination, which was just showing different images of the universe, and the music of Brian Eno, and then Brian would walk on. Well, Brian would actually appear. They wouldn't know that he was on stage. He would get on in this darkness. Suddenly he would be lit, and everyone would go, whoa, like that. And he'd just go, welcome to an evening of cosmology and astronomy, and everyone would be excited. But beforehand, we would literally just be mucking around. Yeah. And then suddenly, about 30 seconds before I was going on, I'd be waiting for my cue. And then I'd have a little moment where I think, I did remember to go to the toilet, didn't I? Those little things where you go, it'd be awful if I wet myself in front of 11,000 people. And then and that would be the worry, and then just wander on. Yeah. Whereas this, much smaller venues, there is a greater worry, because I have total responsibility for it, and I want everyone to have a good time, and I want them to enjoy themselves, but I also have set certain restrictions, because there are things that I really want to talk about and ideas that I want to share with them. And certainly, especially when it gets to the little bit when I'm talking about ideas involving suicide, I worry about that every night, because I don't want anyone to misinterpret what I'm saying. I'm saying it because of the conversation I had. I'm saying it because I hope there is a pragmatic thing behind it. It's not a series of jokes. Yeah. I really do worry about the fact that there are people who are not able to express themselves, and that sometimes that can lead to a terrible conclusion for a life, but it also has to be entertaining at the same time. And hopefully so far, because there was one person who got in contact with me, I wrote a blog post. I don't know how long these answers are meant to be, and I'm sorry that they're always very long, by the way. when I wrote a blog post saying I'm trying to address this subject, and I knew that by writing that, some people would then approach me and say I have a story I'd like to tell, and certain people, some people said you're not allowed to, you shouldn't make jokes about that, and I said, well, they're not jokes. They're jokes involving this thing, but it's trying to be more than that. And then someone got in contact with me and saying, I'm coming to see your show on Thursday, and I don't know if I can handle that bit because his brother had killed himself within the last year. And I said, look, come and see me before the show, and I'll give you some idea of what I'm talking about.
The library will be closing in 15 minutes.
That's the kind of thing that happens when you try and bring up suicide as a subject. The library is forced to close immediately. That's it. Shut down the library. This is not what the library was for.
In 15 minutes.
I knew I shouldn't have brought my library robot with me. It's always going on about the library. It's like, we'll go tomorrow, calm down.
Why have you got such a negative library robot? I liked your older library robot that was always about the library opening, but now this melancholic Marvin the Paranoid Android library of closure android robot. But it's it's so I that thing of not wanting to, if you're dealing with certain subjects, then you have to be aware that sometimes some people will be won't like it, and some people will be upset by it. But so far the reaction that I've had from people has been that they're glad that mental health's being talked about.
Well, that's it, because the thing is too, if someone is sort of suffering in silence and they sort of feel like they're going through these things by themselves, but then if you, of course you have to be careful what you say, but if you, a problem shared can be a problem halved, and if you're sort of relating to things the person says and can hopefully talk you through some of the stuff, it might help a little bit.
That's the intention. The hope is that, and like at one point I talk about a couple of people that I know who got to that point of wanting to kill themselves, and when I say one of the things that stopped one of the people doing it, I have to also though underline the fact, there's certain responsibility where you have to move away from a joke and say, oh, by the way, this is not some universal panacea, this is not going to work for everyone, so I also don't want to say, here are the ways that you can stop people doing terrible things. That's not going to be it. So it's every night when I get to that bit, and I never skip, some nights I think, should I skip over it tonight, should I not do it? And I think, no, I kind of in my head I made a pact with that woman that I spoke to in Adelaide.
That's really good. So is there anything when you're on stage that ever goes wrong, that you've had go wrong? Lovely
if I could just get it down to just a few anythings as opposed to so many everythings. Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted.
Just embrace them.
There are moments. I mean, one of the worst things that can happen is when there are certain things that you've got in your head and there is some structure to the show and you're just getting to the bit where you've got a big conclusion and then you go, oh, God, I forgot to set up this joke half an hour ago. So you do get to that point of realising that you were about to get to what you thought was a magnificent conclusion, but you haven't given the audience the information that was required. Or sometimes when you're doing something... It's an interesting thing that some work which comes out so much from improvisation will eventually fall into a pattern. Yeah. And some nights you're saying something and you just go, oh, I stumbled on a word. And the mere act of stumbling on that now means that the punchline won't be as good. And then sometimes you just go off on a tangent and you can't find yourself again. You think, where was I? What was I talking about? So all of those, and some nights you just look at an audience and you think, this isn't going to work tonight. It doesn't happen very often, but there's a certain, certainly the kind of people who come to my shows is kind of a broad mix of people who I would say overall are quite often slightly on the outside. I always say, I've said in the past to the audience, I go, my core demographic was very rarely chosen first for any games whatsoever at school, and but within that I'll often have people who are in their 80s and I'll have sometimes people who are like 13 and 14 years old, and so but every now and again, there's a beautiful, wonderful Curb Your Enthusiasm, Larry David. Larry David, when he was a comic working in the New York circuit, apparently sometimes he would just walk out in front of the audience and he would look at them and he would just pan across them and then he'd just go, no. And he'd walk off again. And of course other comics loved it, but it was just a thing. He would make a judgment and he'd go, no, wrong people, I'm off.
I have that. I wake up in the morning sometimes, look around and now go back to sleep.
Yeah, not today. No. Today's not the day to get involved with the day. Yeah.
Give that another 7 hours, I think. Yeah.
Tuesday's off. Can someone just announce it? Tuesday will be off for Sarah. That's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. So who makes you laugh? Who are your comedic inspirations? Who, when you watch them, really get a laugh out of you each time?
Well, I mean, I love working with my friend Josie Long. I think she's, and I mean, in terms of friends, people like Josie Long and Stuart Lee, I love. And who's made me love? I mean, the shows that were fantastic that I saw in Edinburgh. John Luke Roberts did an absolutely wonderful show. Mae Martin's show, Dope, was brilliant. Hannah Gadsby's show, which won the Edinburgh or shared the Edinburgh Award, is. In some ways quite a disturbing show, but an act of utter brilliance. It certainly didn't make me laugh more than any other shows, but in terms of what I took away with it. And then there's someone like Brian Gittins, who is tremendously funny. Joanna Neary is brilliant. I watched the last Billy Connolly show, the one that he did most recently, and it was lovely. They did a screening with a bunch of comedians, so you've still got the sense of everyone being together, even though I hadn't had the chance to see him live. And I still watch Billy Connolly and go, the slightest noise, just him doing when he talks about going out to Africa for comic relief and getting in these little planes, and just him making the noise of that moment the propeller stops and never quite knowing. Just that alone for 2 minutes, you watch that and it's beautiful. And it's part of the thing that's wonderful about Billy Connolly is he's genuine, it's real. So I find I love Laurel and Hardy as well. There's a lot of just the classic things that if I'm looking to be delighted, and every time that I watch anything that Rick Mayall did, Rick Mayall was one of my icons growing up, and I still find that when he gets angry about something, that impotent rage of the idiot when he's standing in dog excrement, I can watch the clip of him sliding in dog excrement in More Bad News over and over again. It will always delight me. So it's a very long list of things that I find really, but yeah, I suppose Billy Connolly, Rick Mayall, Laurel and Hardy.
It's a very good list. Some of my favourites. I reviewed a box set of Laurel and Hardy films once, and I got excited when there was ones with colour in or with sound. I was like, ooh.
It's great, isn't it? There's just one of my County Hospital, which I don't know if you remember, the County Hospital is where Ollie is in hospital. He's got his leg up. We're not quite sure what's happened. And just from the moment it starts, Ollie's so happy. Ollie's having a lovely time in hospital, just relaxing. And then he suddenly hears some whistling, and he knows it's Stan's whistling. And the way he just puts the book down, and that's the day ruined, that's everything ruined for him. And then there's a great bit, and Stan comes in, and what has he brought for him? He's brought him hard-boiled eggs and nuts. He goes, hard-boiled eggs and nuts. Why don't you bring me any candy? Well, you haven't paid me for the last lot. And it's just, and hard-boiled eggs and nuts is one of my favourite phrases. Why would you bring hard-boiled eggs and nuts to a guy in hospital, and then just he's sitting there and he's peeling it? Beautiful. And it's because there's love there as well. Kurt Vonnegut, the great author Kurt Vonnegut, he loved Laurel and Hardy, and it's because there's deep humanity and there's deep love in what appears to be very simple slapstick.
Absolutely. Now, I must talk about Infinite Monkey Cage. First of all, where did it get its name from?
It got its name because the people at Radio 4 suggested it was called Top Geek. Now, once it was suggested it was going to be Top Geek, we were not going to call it. I mean, it was like such the wrong thing. It was not what we wanted to. And so I was in a small room in Levenshulme in Manchester, and I just sat there and I wrote 150 potential titles. I just was writing them right. I thought, I'm going to find something here. And one of them was The Infinite Monkey Cage. It just seemed like a name which didn't say too much. It wasn't called Science Comedy Hour or whatever. And then once it started, people, of course, became interested in what does it mean? What is an infinite monkey cage? Is the cage infinite? Are the monkeys infinite? What is it? And so it was lovely. We've just done a book, and the whole of the start of the book is us discussing all of the different reactions we've had to the name. So it just came from not wanting to call it Top Geek.
That makes sense.
And just me going, I'm going to find another name.
So really, it should almost be Infinite Monkey Cage so far, because there'd be no way of measuring if it is actually infinite.
Oh, I'm not going to give you any clues into the secret of the Infinite Monkey Cage.
Oh, no, don't.
You're going to have to work out the equations yourself, and then you can send them to Professor Brian Cox, and he'll mark them.
Ooh. Based on how I did in maths, I'm sure that's going to go very well. I'll just have to keep retaking it every year. It'll be fine. I get infinite cracks at this, right?
Well, it's a lovely thing. Josie Long, my friend Josie, did. She went and did GCSE maths when she was like 34 years old. She decided, I'm going to go to night school and do that.
I totally nailed it and got a C the second time, so that's enough.
You need to then, yeah.
That's all I needed.
Josie, yeah.
That's a pass. So, what is Professor Brian Cox like to work with?
It's very easy, generally. We do sometimes have flaming rows, and they're always about equations or something. There is the difference between us is I am it is the odd couple. It is Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon. Brian drifts through life with his physics brain, and I, of course, have all the kind of fury of someone who's an arts graduate, and I need to get this right. And every now and again, there will be a collision between his very logical mind and then my kind of, but this doesn't make any sense. In the last series, we had two really big rows. Yeah. One of them about simulation theory and the idea that the entirety of our existence is a simulation. And I really don't have much truck with that. And he went, but the equation works. And we had a proper stand-up row. But those are the only things we ever row about. There's nothing kind of, in terms of ego, there's never a problem, and like I said, the arena tour, considering from the starting point in Australia, August 2015. No, it's 2016. It's 2017 now, isn't it?
It keeps changing, possibly.
The trouble is, when Brian has invented this time machine, I never know where he's dropped me off. Yeah. But it's that 100 dates we did, we never had any arguments on tour. And we were very relaxed, and it's great because sometimes I'll just be reading something and go, Brian, explain what that means. And he loves explaining, so he'll explain these things. And then we'd just finish the show. We'd get into this little van that we had, nice van, and we'd sit there, driving to the next place, eating cheese.
The library will be closing.
Paranoid library robots, stop closing the library.
It's early in the...
Why is it 3 times?
I don't know.
What other
it just panics about it. The good thing is after 6, it means we're stuck in the library.
Closing in 5 minutes.
What do you reckon? 3 library closings?
The problem is it can't always be 5 minutes. Why is the time not going out? Why is it not 5 minutes, 4 minutes, 53?
We'll deal with the possible fictional nature of time later on. Yeah. Yeah, don't worry.
Right now,
physicists are dealing with the possible fictional nature of time. It may just be a series of still frames with no action whatsoever. We don't know.
That is true.
I certainly don't know.
Depends if the universe is flat, if all time's happening at the same time. Speaking of which, what are your sort of favourite theories and sort of questions in science? What things inspire and excite you the most about it?
Well, I do. I mean, just so many. I find human evolution and the evolution of life and the variety of life. That to me is like when I was in Bristol, I was going around the museum and gallery. Yeah. And I was thinking about, here are, all of these different pots and mummified creatures and taxidermy and art and biplanes. And you think, well, this is the only planet in the solar system where the Museum of the Planet will have this variety because of the variety of life. The museum that would exist on Saturn or Jupiter, whatever, it's a very limited museum of a selection of gases and various different forms of rocks, and that's it. And maybe we might find some kind of little microbial life. So it is, to me, the variety of possibilities within imagination. And then there's a great line by the wonderful physicist Richard Feynman who said, you have to remember that the imagination of nature is far greater than the imagination of man. And I think that is a very beautiful thing, which is, for me, one of the most exciting things in science is merely the ability for human beings to use their curiosity to imagine why we are as we are, why the universe is as we are. And then from there we go into gravitational waves and black holes and the behaviour of bonobo apes and why we have imagination and what is the purpose of us being aware of ourselves, and the fact that inside you is a code and inside me is a code, but we are not totally, the code is not the ultimate definition of us, because then we have nurture as well, and why do we become the human beings that we are? All of those things are just, to me, magnificent mysteries where there is a journey, which is, I think what I find most exciting about science is there is not an end to the journey. There is not a point where you go, science is finished, because every time a branch of science appears to reach a conclusion, that conclusion then from that blossoms new questions.
Yeah, because it's always based on our current understanding of the universe. At one point they thought Earth was flat, and some rappers on Twitter still think it is, bizarrely. And when climate change didn't used to be a thing and all that, again, same thing. Some rappers don't believe in that. In 100 years, our perception of the universe might be completely different. And I love that there's, things that happen at a huge universe sort of scale, and then you look at like a sort of a quantum scale, and there's like similarities and things, and it's just really interesting.
No, I think that's, as you said, there's a constant growth. Gravitational waves, just won, 3 scientists won the Nobel Prize in physics for that. Gravitational waves, it took a long time. Here was a theory that comes out of Einstein's ideas, and then there's a point where 2 black holes merged, and then we had the technology within a few decades to, using lasers, measure whether gravitational waves existed. And the idea of gravitational waves, the idea of them rolling through us all the time, all of that, it's like when you think of neutrinos passing through you, the fact that there are these particles that don't interact with matter, all of these kind of ideas are very beautiful. And as you said, that it does appear now we've reached a certain point of understanding, but we still don't know at what point you can go to the next corner and go, when there was that story of the fact that neutrinos might have moved faster than the speed of light, and if they moved faster than the speed of light, that would change the rules of the universe. Well, that's it. The library's fucking closed now.
Thank God for that.
Fuck out of here. You stop your reading. You go shout in the streets after your hours of shushiness. But I think there is that.
The library is now closed. Please make your
I did a podcast.
I think it says it all night.
Yeah, I think it's still closed. The library is still closed. Why are you here? How can you hear me? If the library is closed and nobody's here to, yes.
This is a step down from Holly and Red Dwarf.
So I think that those kind of ideas, that the fact that we get to a point where we have the technology where suddenly you go, now we can test this particular idea. Many worlds theory, the idea that there are many different worlds, and the idea that every time you make a decision, in fact, all the possible permutation of that decision branch off. I find that's a lovely idea, but I actually talked to a lot of physicists who say, no, we no longer like that idea. String theory. Should we get around to string theory? Or should I start reading about it now? By the time I've actually got to any level of understanding of it, will they say, that was a bad idea? So I think that's, all of these beautiful things and now we're only limited by how long we can manage to keep the human race going.
Exactly. Well, that's the thing. Yeah, we've got bigger issues at the minute, I guess.
Yeah, and we have to. The trouble is, because we've found so many different ways of disseminating information and so many ways of disseminating misinformation, we do have a tremendous problem with things like the science of climate change and people's understanding of it, and the fact that the same arguments over and over again. If I put up something about climate change, then people are, climate's always changed. Yes, climate has always changed. People are not saying it is a new thing that climate changes. What they're saying is we have no record of it changing at the speed that it is changing. And to me, it's like when people are going, climate changes anyway, so it doesn't make any difference. That's like going, I can murder people then, because they're going to die anyway. People always died. No, but I think that was an unnatural death. Why? Well, because of the knife in the head. Yes, but people have always, all of that stuff. So I think, and the flat earth thing, I don't understand at all. Brian and I have talked about this a lot, and we can't understand how, with now that we've left the planet Earth, we've looked back on the planet Earth, and we look at the eclipses, and there are so many. I don't understand where that comes from. And in fact, even the idea that we used to believe the Earth was flat. Actually, in a lot of cultures, it's always, from the moment the sails disappeared over the horizon, from Eratosthenes working out the circumference of the Earth using shadows, all of these things mean that even a few hundred years ago, we didn't believe the Earth was flat. So where the hell is this? It's part of this cool, this like, scientists say this, but... And you go, no, but your argument needs to be a really cogent argument. And I don't know the flat Earth thing.
Exactly. I mean, I've actually seen it, well, not flat Earth, but I was in New York many years ago, and if you were up high enough, you can actually see the curvature of Earth.
Someone's done that, haven't they, on YouTube? Haven't they done a thing where they film all the way as they go around on a plane trying to... But those things are they're so wasteful. It's a bit like... I was talking... There's a philosopher called Slavoj Žižek who was talking about the fact that his publisher wanted him to write a book about Donald Trump. And he said, there isn't a book. There's nothing to say. There are so many things we get caught up about, and you go, Donald Trump is summed up in a sentence, and there is nothing interesting to really be said about him. We merely have to find a way and rejoinders to try and make more people realise that certain narcissistic human beings will do a great deal of damage. With the thing that's happened, the time that we're recording this week, of course, there has been, a terrible act of crime involving guns. And yet the arguments that you see for those who are wishing to defend them make no sense. And there is no, when you see that these same people are the people who are saying we mustn't let in people through our borders because of terrorism and what they'll do, and you go, look, why are these lives at different worth? Why do we decide that one person's death suddenly creates a moral imperative of shutting the borders, but another person's or 50 people's death does not create a moral imperative that says we have to find a way of not glamorizing the use of these kind of weapons and not having them in the hands of so many people? And then someone goes, well, if you bring in safety checks, it doesn't make any difference because a lot of these people have no mental health problems in the background. You go, so what you're really saying is, if we can't work out who is going to go off on a spree, maybe it's better that they're not accessible to anyone. Not the argument of going, well, you never know who's going to go off on a spree, so give them to everyone. Also, I didn't realise, I think Michael Moore put up a thing, 77% of Americans don't even own any form of weaponry. So, in terms of pistols or rifles. And yet, in the way that we're sent the message, it's as if this is a freedom that is something that the whole of America wants to rejoice in.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, most of them don't even... Yeah. Sorry, we got off on a tangent, but I just find that different way of thinking about things where you go, one of the hardest things for us to do is to look at, if Jeremy Corbyn had done the speech that Theresa May had done, can you imagine that Quentin Letts from the Daily Mail would have been talking about the triumph of that speech? No, he wouldn't. And this is the hardest thing that we all have to try and do, which is to look at each individual and each action with the same ethics and the same morality, whether it is the person on your side or your enemy.
That's it, because people are just biased, aren't they? So they'll spin a bad thing as being a good thing if it's sort of their political agenda.
Yeah, we all have our biases, and I know that there are certain, when one of our heroes commits something, and we're interesting talking with the guy who works here, we were talking about Morrissey, and Morrissey is becoming harder and harder to defend with some of his pronouncements, but you can, sometimes you go, I've still got to try though, because it's Morrissey from the Smiths, and then eventually you have to go, no, I have to now give up on these good intentions.
Yeah, it's like... You'd almost have to disassociate their art from what they say and, still listen to the music, but then just turn him off.
Well, I think I might even give up on the music. I went to see Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds the other day, and they're one of my favourite bands of all time, and I think that maybe I should spend more time just listening to him and PJ Harvey and Savages.
It's a good idea.
I think I will.
Yeah. So, obviously you're surrounded by science and all that kind of thing quite a lot, and you think about and discuss it a lot. Have you sort of changed your own viewpoint of your own existence and your sort of place in the universe? Because of course we're all sort of made from stardust and all that kind of thing, and does it sort of give you a greater appreciation of life?
I think it does. I think even though the deities are gone for me, I think the fact that, as you said, there is that beautiful thing which I think Lawrence Krauss talks about, the idea that the atoms in some of the atoms in one hand come from a different star to some of the atoms in the other hand, and then suddenly you get this, even just saying that, the enormity of the universe, this beautiful kind of cosmological image. And again, going back to things like the genetic code and going back to think of the variety of life and knowing that we are related, when you go to the basest first kind of life that we've been able to understand as existing on Earth, that from that grows all of this variety, the gnu, the camel, the stingray, all of these different things. I think the appreciation increases with getting just little germs of understanding. And then when you do think of the magnitude, when I first read, I was certain it was a typographical error on it, 200 billion stars in our galaxy, and you just go, whoa, cosmological vertigo. And I think those things do make it a very beautiful story. They make the fact that the difficulty of life, the rarity of life, the fact that might turn out that there's loads of planets that have life on, but from what we can see so far, it requires a certain number of elements to get a complex life. Or indeed any life.
You have to be in the Goldilocks zone, so it's not too hot, not too cold, plenty of porridge.
Yeah, all of those things. Yeah,
I understood that correctly. I think
exactly it. Yeah. The most important thing for life is bears. Yeah. Once you've got bears, then there will be a myriad of.
So there's a bear necessity.
Sing the song. Actually, you can't, can you? For legal reasons, you're only allowed 8 seconds. Isn't that right?
I could spread them out.
Yeah, but you know what Disney are like. I wouldn't get involved with a litigious group of people.
Yeah, they really are. It's outrageous. So, a new book's coming out called How to Build a Universe.
Part 1.
Oh, part 1.
Yeah, we're only doing How to Build a Universe Part 1 because we thought if we called the book, this is a book by Brian and myself, and it's and also our wonderful producer Alexandra Feacham as well, and we didn't want to call it How to Build a Universe, the publisher did. And then I said, well, if we call it that, it has to be called How to Build a Universe Part 1. Because what if someone buys it and then they get to the end and they've built their universe and it's a right old shoddy mess, and they go, well, this book let me down. You know, it's like if you bought a Mary Berry book and you thought, well, all of these cakes have sunk. Yeah. So I thought if we call it Part 1, they know they're only getting the very basic elements to start building their universe.
See, because this suggests to me, you know, like you get those magazines where you get a bit of something each week. It's like, get your first bit of the universe, only 99p, and then the next week they jack up the price, you get a folder with it, and yeah. So you build a universe over a series of years.
We won't be giving away book 2 free, though, because, of course, that always used to be the rule, didn't it? Buy issue 1, get issue 2 free.
Yeah.
Unexplained magazine, that was the one that I first remember that from. What a great magazine.
I used to read that.
Unexplained was brilliant, yeah.
It's really good.
Looking back to it...
Bigfoot, crop circles.
Oh, Bigfoot's still my favourite. The beautiful story of how they found out that there's a wonderful, you know, as you know, the scary footage of Bigfoot. And it turns out, a man in a gorilla costume.
Huh?
Yeah, I'm really sorry. Spoiler alert for life. And one of the reasons they worked out for sure, they eventually found a man who, if you look at the footage, there's a bit where it appears his eye is reflecting sunlight, which an eye should not reflect sunlight. And it turned out the guy who was given the job of wandering along dressed in a gorilla costume had a glass eye. So
really?
That's what. But you may then say, counter and go, how do we know Bigfoots don't have the technology to create glass eyes? And then we have to move to part 3 of this investigation. Exactly.
It's very exciting. In crop circles, you know, just bits of string, people walking around. But, you know, as a kid reading all this kind of thing, it like really captures your imagination.
When you were growing up, the crop circles would have been big, wouldn't they? Because they were late 90s and stuff. So yeah,
that used to be like half a field.
Yeah. And round here as well. This isn't a bad area to get in, but it's... Yeah, it's. I mean, I think that's the thing, isn't it? Well, again, a wonderful piece of human imagination. The imagination to create a beautiful con, the imagination to create a way of making those wheat fields look beautiful, then the imagination of farmers to charge £5 for anyone to come and see the field.
That's it. And there was it? I'm going to get the date wrong. I'm just going to say the 1920s. There was like a famous photo of like some fairies in a garden. Was it?
Yes, the Cottingley Fairies. Yeah. It's a and Arthur Conan Doyle was a great admirer of their work, and it appears that, you know, you look at them and you think, I think that's cardboard cutouts, but it was enough. And that's an interesting story. Some of the things that people believed in, like the new rise of psychic mediums that happened around the same time, and of course a lot of that comes from post World War I, where people had been devastated. People had lost their children, and then also Spanish flu had then decimated even more people. So some of these beliefs, like the belief in fairies and the belief in psychic mediums, thrive at times where people go, I want there to be something mystical.
Exactly. So still staying on books, Dead Funny. There's been 2 of those.
I love doing those. Those were with my friend Johnny Mains. We were drinking one day at Norwich Arts Centre, and he's a huge horror fan, and I love those kind of, you know, those books, the Pan Book of Horror Stories, and the works of people like Robert Aikman, who was a very interesting writer of not so much horror stories, they're eerie stories. They're stories that leave you feeling a little bit off kilter, and so we thought it would be
like garage sandwiches.
No, that's not. No, there's no diarrhea that comes from reading the books of Robert Aikman. And Robert Aikman's books probably contain more butter. But it's... so we thought, a lot of my friends who are comedians love writing horror stories, and they love horror. So we got, you know, Stuart Lee, and who was it? It was Stuart Lee and Phil Jupitus and Josie Long and Izzy Sutty and Charlie Higgs and all these people. And Rhys Shearsmith from the League of Gentlemen and Inside Number 9, which is one of my favourite things as well. And he'd never written a horror story before. He'd written TV horror stories, and they'd written the radio stuff, and they've written films, but he'd never done just for a book. And his horror story, which is the opening of the first volume of Dead Funny, it's a very funny story about 2 kids, one of whom has gone blind from getting dog poo in his eyes, and then trying to take revenge on dogs, and then realising they shouldn't be taking the revenge on the dogs, they should be taking the revenge on the owners. And it is a very dark and mysterious tale with an end that made me laugh out loud, but not the person who reviewed it 2 stars on Amazon and said, I don't see what's funny about killing dogs. I didn't read any of this book. 2 stars. I thought, well, that's pretty good. Didn't even read the whole of story 1. He still gave us 2 stars.
It's pretty good going.
Where would it have been if we got to story 5?
Oh, exciting. You never know. So you mentioned earlier your good friend JC Long. You also do a bit of a podcast thing with her called Book Shambles.
Yes, we have a lot of fun doing that. That's we used to do about probably 11 years ago. We did a series called, what was the first? I can't remember what the first series was called. Eventually, I was called Josie and Robin Show and Tell. It was just called Show and Tell, and then we did Shambles. And then we decided we wanted to do podcasts, because people kept saying, "Oh, we'll do podcasts again," which was nice. I said, "Well, let's restrict it a bit." And so we'll do it on books, because we both love reading. And we just had lovely people on it. Matt Lucas is the one that's currently out at the moment, and the brilliant singer Tanita Tickeram's coming out very soon. Robert Forster from the Go-Betweens, Chris Hadfield, the astronaut, Stuart Lee, Alan Moore,
Greg Proops.
Greg Proops was a really interesting one, because it was just after the murder in Charlottesville during but someone protesting against the racist and the fascist who was murdered. And so Greg came in with a very, there was a lot of anger in that one of what had happened. And it allowed us to talk about people like the great writer James Baldwin, who is one of the most beautiful, passionate political writers of the 20th century. And that's the beautiful thing, is we get a chance to just sit with people who their reading very often means that you go away and go, "I must go to the bookshop immediately."
That's the great thing about it. And, you're learning about not only books that are coming out in the case of Matt Lucas, but, just his passions and things he loves. And, hearing you and Josie talk about your inspirations and just how your paths have collided as well. It's really interesting to listen to.
Oh, I'm glad we loved it. It's so much fun. And it's weird now that Josie is... I still can't believe she's 36. It's ridiculous, because I knew, I was 32 when I first met her, and she would say how old I was, and now I remind her, I go, "Do you remember that when I was 32, you would go, how very old I was? You're 36 now, Josie Long." But I am still very much older than you. I'm still gnarled. And it's... And I think it's a chance as well sometimes to express political passions, because in a lot of the mainstream media, I think the left have been increasingly marginalised. We've seen this. Nikesh Shukla was actually telling me, who is one of the people behind the brilliant collection of stories, The Good Immigrant, which is an amazing. Nikesh, I didn't know, was today told me the Overton window. Do you know about the Overton window?
No, but I wish I did.
Let's find out if I can remember. Basically, the Overton window is where the window that looks out on news, on the angle of news. And so when you have something like Nigel Farage on Question Time 32 times, what happens is the window has now moved to the right, and you're looking towards... And so then the left becomes... You don't have to be very left for it to be an extremist position, because everything is shifted to the right. And it's called the Overton window, apparently. And it's... And so I think anywhere where you get the chance, we've always been told, the BBC, it's got all this left-wing bias. Oh, look, Jeremy Hardy is on Radio 4, and Mark Steele, and the rest of it is actually, if anything, I would say, certainly within the news department, skewed not in the direction of being overly left-wing. And so I think anywhere the liberal voices and the left-wing voices, we need not to be... Charlotte Church was talking about this a while ago. She was saying, because of course Charlotte is prepared to really just stand up there, and she has to take an enormous amount of abuse, because not only is she prepared to share her opinion, but as we know, she's a woman, and that experience means that when you speak out loud, I suffer, of course. I'm a white middle-class male. Imagine my pain. Let's do a roundup. This all works. This is dynamite.
This is fine. This is really good. So it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
We just found out my show starts half an hour earlier, and it's about to start in about 10 minutes. Brilliant. I've got to plug everything in.
There's others coming.
Sarah.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for your time.
Can we'll do part 2 later on. If Joe Lyson's done it twice, I don't see why I should.
Exactly.
Just he's on the telly.
Robin Ince has run off onto this stage, and I'm going to shortly be joining him from a seated capacity. Thank you very much for watching this interview. Be sure to share, subscribe, give the video a massive thumbs up, or infinite thumbs up, and I'll see you all again soon for another episode of the Sarah O'Connell Show. Bye.